reminds me of this great piece you had in the Trumpeter last year, Deep Social Ecology. And which was just, it's one of those things in environmental philosophy. There's been this terrible conflict between deep ecology, on the one hand, saying this is a spiritual problem. And then you have social ecology saying, no, 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 it's a socioeconomic problem. It's about politics. And then you're reading that and you're saying, no, actually, that's one problem. And
Yes.
so, which, is a very helpful way to understand spirituality. The deep doesn't mean separate from the shallow side of, economics or politics. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about deep social ecology. I think that really resonates with a lot of stuff you've been saying, while we're talking. The spiritual isn't disconnected from the material, the human, socioeconomic. Those are all kind of integrated for you.
Yeah. Uh, I'll go into it first, the back door. I think this is, at least for me, it's a very compelling problematic. How have we generally thought about nature in terms of our political traditions? I would say a really telling move is our reliance upon the social contract
Hmm.
and the state of nature. And how does the state of nature emerge? Now, it purports to be we were in nature and we figured, well, this really sucks, so we should do this. Or this is really great. I hope we don't do that, if you're Rousseau.
Right.
But some version of where, but no one is asking this question from being in nature or knowing anything about nature. You're asking about it by either holding up retroactively the status quo. You're trying to argue that what we have already is great, and we should continue. So you are retroactively constituting the interests that are already prevailing, or maybe you're critiquing them, but you're already speaking from the hold of a certain social political standpoint and thinking about it retroactively. So Rousseau gives us a nature that never was. We're all awesomely getting along. No, it's hard. Now Hobbes gives us something that really was just, him imagining that as horrible as civilization was, it must have been even worse. But none of this is what deep ecology sees, for example. Deep ecology is, let's start with the science of ecology. Let's pay attention to the sustaining conditions and ask ourselves. Now, this gets written off as a spiritual question, but by spiritual, we don't mean let's then have a fantastical moment where we import some magical dimension.
Right.
Let's ask ourselves wisdom. So the job of a scientific ecology is not to be wise about what they discover. It's just to lay out some of the rudiments of how a given bioregion operates and its level of complexity in genesis. Deep ecology, so the deep is just acting on the science of ecology, is then asking questions like, well, what kind of economics, what kind of politics are appropriate to these sustaining conditions? Put in other words, deep ecology then says, given how a bioregion works, how would humans belong? How would anything belong
Hmm.
to it? Now, that's all spiritual is doing. And quite noticeably, if you take sustenance or nutrition from, say, theism, fine. But you're not pulling that stuff in to cheat.
Right.
Uh, get your spiritual nourishment and courage from that if that's your thing. But be prepared to talk to the atheists, because all wisdom is going to be able to deal wisely with how an ecology works. I'll give you a second example of deep ecology, and this was so not the Arnie Ness version. Arnie Ness had two formulations of it, and I would say don't live by the letter of that. Deep
Right.
ecology is just to ask deep questions about the science of ecology. So it's the wisdom of ecological living, which assumes not the politics of what you imagine the ecology to be or the economics of what you imagine it to be. It means actually learning what it is. The second example I would use of a deep ecologist, but never use this term. Um, he was a very ecological thinker, but I wouldn't say he was an ecological activist because his agenda was different because he was Standing Rock Sioux, and that's Vine Deloria Jr. But he says this about science. He says, look, He tells the story of early settlers coming in to the indigenous elders, and they say, well, let me show you how science works. And they show them how science works. And, aren't you amazed? Don't you want to be one of us? And the elder goes, okay, well, it's amazing what you do. I can see that you know many more things than we will ever know that are true. You can do many things, some of which we don't even understand. And so I can see your science is true and that it's powerful, but it is insufficient. Now, that's the thing. It's this insufficiency that deep ecology is interested in. Mm. And so Vindeloria says, well, really what's the problem with science isn't that it's false or that it's evil, is that it's immature. That's the term he uses, because you unleash this tremendous power, but in so doing, you so thoroughly demote the capaciousness of philosophical thinking that it's impossible to say anything wise, because either philosophy is trivially micrological, and therefore it says true things that are never wise things, that never matter. They don't speak to the great matters, like what are we doing to ourselves? Or they stupefy the whole thing. The wisdom becomes new age, and new age is stupid, frankly. It's bad science, it's magical thinking, it's woo-woo, and it's anything can be true. Wisdom is just a mature relationship to that, a deeper relationship to that. The immaturity of science is that science is true, but it's superficial. It's insufficient for living life. So, for example, when lots of scientists study the world and they can see that climate change and many other ecological crises are imminent, are unfolding, going to end very, very poorly, they're on the front lines, many of them fighting it. But they still themselves, I sense, still seek for deeper ways of being. How do we speak to the science in a way that is wise and compelling, non-trivially yet non-stupidly? Yeah. Now that's hard. Or I would just say, mature. Mm-hmm. The settler colonialists were immature. That science is the most dangerous thing, not because science is bad. Science is not bad. For a mature mind, science can be part of how we help all sentient beings flourish. Right. But, problem is we have no idea what we're doing with it. So that's deep ecology, is that insight. Now, the power of social ecology, of course, is, I think what makes it so incredibly important right now, is that it keeps ecology from being a niche item. Social ecology really understands the ecological or systemic origins of oppression, of domination. That what we do to the natural world, well, Bookchin said we learned that we didn't learn to enslave people by enslaving animals. No, we learned to enslave animals from enslaving people. Now, I don't care which of those came first, chicken or the egg. It's just, all you have to simply say is, yeah, what we do to each other, social, politically, including in capitalism, and what we do to the earth are of a piece. And so ecology can't separate itself from things like the recent decision of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. It can't separate itself from women's issues. It can't separate itself from Black Lives Matter. It can't separate itself from issues like reparations. It can't separate itself from enduring restoration of justice for indigenous peoples, including land justice. Yeah. It can't. Those are not ecologically an option. So deep social ecology means our economics and politics have to be wise and ecologically broad without stupid macrology or vapid micrology.